and talk about this. My first question to anybody who is there is if anybody knows what this is. Anybody seen anything like that before? Um, that is. Sorry, I told you the technical stuff was different than anything I've ever done before, and I'm running into issues now. I gotta go back to here. Sorry about that. Yes, this little thing, this round disc that I have in front of me, is called a record, a vinyl record. And this was created in the 1800s. Actually, something looked exactly like this was created more in the 1901. The first one that looked just like this came out, and this became the popular way that sound was that music was distributed. If you wanted to make a recording and make it available to the world, it was used on something like this, played on a player like this, and that was the way that music was distributed for well over 50 years. Actually, it wasn't until the 1960s that another technology came along that started to usurp it. The sound. Okay. The technology came along that started to usurp it in the 1960s. There was actually two that came along right at the same time. One was called an 8-track, which I actually don't have a copy of. Some of you probably have 8 tracks at home. The other one was called a micro cassette, and it came to be known just as the cassette tape, and it looked like this. They came in cases like this, and they had sleeves that you could open up and see all the information about who did what on it. And this became the normal thing for music recording distribution. It really took off in the 1970s. 1970s and there was kind of a duel between 8 tracks and cassette tapes. But then an invention in 1979 led to cassettes being the thing that took off. Everybody wanted to have cassettes for their music. And that invention was something that looked kind of like this. This is not an original Sony Walkman, but Sony produced a little thing like this that you could put the tape in and record it and fast forward, and you could carry it around with you anywhere you went, a portable music player. And within a very short period of time, 8 tracks disappeared, and in 1984, for the first time ever, more cassettes were sold than records, and records began to get obsolete. That doesn't mean that things were good for cassettes, though, because in the mid-1980s, right as this became the best-selling format for music, something else was invented, and it looked like this. Anybody can tell me what that is? That is a compact disc. Came in cases like this, again with the thing that you can pull out and look at all the information about the album, and that it had much better sound quality than a cassette. It held a lot more information than a cassette, and it was a lot more stable than a cassette. It got played on usually big giant things. It's more like this. You'd put the disc in and it would go in and a laser would read it and play it. They also made some portable things for compact discs as well. And so within a very short period of time, by 1991, it was outselling tapes. So tapes were the most selling thing for about 7 years, and then CDs took over. By the time we get to the early 2000s, CDs made up almost 96% of the music that was being sold. It had complete dominance. Cassette tapes and records were virtually obsolete. But that doesn't mean things were great for CDs either. Computers were getting faster, and the internet got invented, and in 2001, just as CDs were getting their complete dominance, Apple invented something called the iPod, and digital music became a thing. 10 years later, in 2011, 10 years after CDs had completely taken over the musical world, digital music sales passed CD sales. And so people were buying their music online. But that didn't even last long. Around 2005, music streaming services began. Then Spotify launched in 2008, followed quickly by Apple Music and Google Play Music. And today, over 80% of music sales are through streaming services. But there's a price to pay for all of that. Kids, why am I telling you about all of this history of music stuff when you can just go to your Alexa or your Google Home or whatever you have there and just ask it to play whatever song you want? In order for all of that music to get pumped through the internet onto computers and phones, the quality of the sound got squished. The music wasn't as rich and vibrant as it had been before. And so something pretty cool has happened in the last several years. It's kind of fascinating. This, which was invented in a format that looked a lot like this in 1901, has started to make a comeback. People realized that there was something in what was invented over 100 years ago that modern conveniences just don't have, and they started to reach back for it. You know, there's still a few places where CDs are around, but it's estimated that in 2020, for the first time in about 35 years, vinyl sales are going to pass CD sales. It's worth mentioning here that much of the vinyl sales is for music from the vinyl generation. The number one selling musician for vinyl records in 2019 was the Beatles. Why am I telling you all this? Because there's something to be learned through our efforts in music to just always try and get things faster and easier. Growing up as kids, as teenagers, it's a lot about figuring things out. It's a lot about learning, and it's a lot of cases, it's about trying to put away what was in the past and become a person that's, well, not like our parents. We got to be better. We got to try and do something that's ours. But in our efforts to try and do something new, it's easy to let go of the good things from the past. And there's an interesting story in the Old Testament that talks about how important it is to learn from the past and hold on to the important things. The story is about the nation of Israel, and they get to the edge of this land that God is promising them to, and there's this big river between them and where they need to get in. So they get to the edge of this river, and it's fast flowing, and God says, okay, just go for it. And so the first people get to the edge of the river, and as they step into the river divides, the riverbed goes dry, and the nation walks across this river, the Jordan River. It's an amazing miracle, but it's what comes next that I want to highlight. Joshua, the leader of Israel, tells 12 men to get these stones and to set up a monument to remember what God did for them. Then he gives this instruction in Joshua 4, 6-7. He says, in the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. He said, you want to set these up so that your kids will ask you, what was that like? What happened there? And then you'll have a chance to tell them about what God did in the past. You'll be able to share about the richness of your history and what God has done. It's a really cool story with two reminders for ourselves as we move into the future. The first is an invitation to kids, young people, to be curious about what's gone before us. We sometimes think that whatever is happening in the future is better, and we just focus on that, and we miss the richness of what went before. You need to be curious about what's gone before us. Ask people who have lived longer than you, not just so you can hear a cool story, and not so that you can try and get stuck in the past, but because there's some great things there that we need to be reminded of, learn from, and not let go of. The second reminder is for those who are older. You need to tell the stories from your past, especially the stories about what God's done and how he's been faithful. It's easy as a parent to think that since our kids don't necessarily really want to hear from us or hear our stories, that they don't have any value. But they do. Even if your kids don't want to hear them, your grandchildren likely do, or even your kids' friends. Find ways to share your stories so that they're available when people are ready to hear. Write them down. Do a journal about your memories and lessons learned. With the technology we have, a lot of you are great with technology. You could do a video journal. Or just take your grandkids out for hot chocolate once it's safe to do that again and talk with them about your past. Let them ask questions and don't be afraid to tell your story as you answer. Like listening to music on vinyl records, there's a genuineness and a warmth in that kind of sharing that can't be replicated anywhere else.